Welcome to the Futurebuild podcast, your go-to source for exploring the innovations and challenges shaping the built environment. I'm your host, Martin Hearn, and today we're joined by someone whose work speaks directly to the future of how and where we build. Chloe Donovan is the founder of Natural Building Systems and the force behind Adept Modular, a plant-based, precision-engineered panel system designed to be produced locally and installed at scale. At the heart of her mission is the belief that sustainability isn't just a material choice, but a systems shift, one that brings together agriculture, manufacturing, and the built environment into a circular, regionally anchored model. In this conversation, we'll explore Chloe's journey from the idea to prototype, the early case studies that help shape her approach, and the challenges of bringing innovation into one of the most risk-averse sectors in the economy. We'll also dive into her recent reflections on the updated EU bioeconomy strategy and what it revealed about where Europe is heading and where the UK risks leaving behind. From micro factories in East Anglia to circular retrofits in Ireland, this is a story about connecting people, materials, and regions in new ways. If you're interested in scalable innovation, policy that drives real change, and what it takes to industrialize natural materials, this episode is not one to be missed. Chloe, an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
We've been wanting to get you on the podcast for so long, and I would say that you're one of the most interesting people that I've met in the construction industry.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind.
But I'd love to you to give the viewers a bit of a sort of history into your background and what got you into the built environment.
Yeah, I guess my route into it was a bit unconventional in that it was actually so my family are farmers, dairy farmers, and my grandparents, and I got involved with some of the more back-end business side of the farm. I was the kind of token millennial who could do spreadsheets, and I helped my grandparents run a farmer's market, and basically I got an interest in the challenges that agriculture in the UK faces in terms of so many farms effectively moving away from farming and diversifying into non-food based crops, or also glamping and various other things. And I effectively fell upon the idea of the ability for us to grow buildings and the potential for that to be a way to actually produce new revenue streams for farmers, but also to enable more affordable, healthier buildings. And despite not having a background in the kind of built environment or the construction space, I've always been very interested in design and the kind of intersection of all of these things. Like I'm kind of naturally a bit of a systems thinker. And so that's really what got me into looking at how could we scale up the demand for short rotation biomass based materials in the built environment, and doing so on a scale where, originally I started out just thinking about my grandparents and thinking like, wouldn't it be cool if they could grow a crop that had a bit of a beneficial impact, but also had a good kind of ultimate use. So many farms growing bioenergy crops and things, or just putting solar panels on the fields or various other things. The idea of growing buildings just really resonated with me, basically. So that's kind of how I got into it, I guess. So, a bit of a random one.
And what were the opportunities that I suppose you saw in the built environment? What was the sort of in particular? I love the idea, by the way, of growing homes, but we have some real challenges.
Yeah, I think for me it was the acknowledging or recognizing the complexity of the climate emergency, the housing crisis, rural economic challenges, like all of these multiple layers of challenges. And especially, being of a millennial generation where like the prospect of owning homes, the affordability of housing, all of that stuff kind of comes together in this complex kind of, and I think the thing that really attracted me was like, if we could find a way to unlock this small part of it, actually, there are these multiple different benefits that can stack up onto each other. I guess where I've ended up is not where I started out. Like I just wanted to find a reason to do that. And it was really only from getting involved with talking to developers, architects, and people in the built environment that I came to realize that actually technology and innovation is key. Like, yes, you can use sustainable materials, but actually, if you're not able to do it in a cost-effective way or at a scale that will move the dial, then, you know, it's all well and good making a couple of lovely, pretty straw bale buildings, things like that. But the problems are bigger than that. And so the solutions have to be a bit more ambitious and responsive to the system's challenges. And that's why the company is called Natural Building Systems, because it's, you know, recognizing that it's not one tiny little solution. It's got to be taking that systems view.
We first met probably in 22 or 23, and it's been fascinating seeing your journey that you've been on in that time. But it'd be great to give the listeners sort of like, how did you go from that sort of big idea? You know, I suppose with most startups as well, you have a big idea, a big concept.
Yeah.
What's that journey been like? How did you go through that? How do you scale up?
Yeah, it's definitely evolved, and really it's credit to all of the fantastic engineers, architects, designers, built environment professionals that I've had the privilege of working with over the years, because, you know, I kind of went into it, I guess I was focused on how can we find a crop that will generate a revenue for farmers, but also do something good in the world and not just, you know, turn fields into solar panels or whatever. And as a result, it meant that what we ended up doing, I wasn't particularly tied to any one way of thinking about it, but it became apparent very quickly from engaging my early business partners, which was a developer and some architects, that modular kit of parts and technology-led kind of precision engineering and all of that was something that needed to be adopted in the construction industry more widely. And the material science and innovation aspect to it. You know, there are so many research papers and academic studies and pieces of work looking at natural materials, the benefits of them for performance, etc. And yet they're not being used in the construction industry at scale. And so really it evolved from just being like, I want to grow industrial hemp. That's the crop that like really captured my imagination and has a value for construction particularly. But it was engaging with these architects and material scientists and developers that led us to kind of land on a plant-based, precision engineered panel kit of parts effectively. And so what was nice for me is that because I didn't come to it with any preconceived, this is what the solution will look like. It's allowed it to evolve over time. And, you know, now recognizing that we've developed a product that we know performs technically, but actually getting to market adoption and scale requires this ecosystem of enabling partners and things. Like, you can have a really great product, but if you haven't got the rest of it lined up, it's not going to get there.
Tell us a little bit about that evolution of the product as well, sort of what it started out to be and maybe where you are now. And I know in a minute we're going to come into the future, but we could sort of see how that's evolved over that time.
Well, I think one of the things we've always been really focused on is like practical implementation. And so when we started out, the goal was to get to a pilot project as quickly as possible, effectively, because there is this wealth of academic background and knowledge, and, you know, natural building materials are as old as buildings, and there is a wealth of established science around, you know, why these materials are good, but combining it with a manufactured led approach, you know, I guess the other thing that one of my business partners contributed to the picture with a background in development was a desire for us to make something that was designed for adaptation and for ease of disassembly. And because he'd been involved in, I guess, the construction industry and seen that churn of fit out cycles in commercial property, but also, you know, we all know that you live in a house, it doesn't take very long before you start thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had a little extension there or a little, you know. So there was that drive from the beginning, and my goal was to try and find agricultural based materials, but there was also an appetite to avoid petrochemical materials as much as we can, and mechanical fixings. But we did a lot of experimentation in the beginning where we were using hand tools, and we started out using hemp lime, which is a material that's been used for decades in the UK and beyond. And it has, all of these kind of technical characteristics we can come on to. But we started out experimenting with that. We were also thinking, like, do we go down the mycelium route? Do we go down, looking into different binders and materials and kind of thinking about how could they be incorporated, but always with the goal of like, how do we do something that's scalable? And that meant cost competitive. We used hemp lime, and it was fun, but it's very messy, it's very slow, and it has all of these constraints. And actually, I think a real breakthrough was when we recruited one of our business partners, Dr. Mike Lawrence, who is a specialist in hemp lab-based material science. So he's got over 100 papers on the subject. And we approached him as an expert in hemp lime and said, these are the problems we're having. Have you got any solutions? And he said, oh, actually, I have been thinking about a potential alternative binder. And so, I think that was a real game changer in terms of the technical compatibility of what we were trying to do. And so once we had that, we worked with him. We developed our own hemp composite called Hempsil, which is what we use inside the panels. And basically it retains all the technical characteristics of hemp lime, but it doesn't have some of the challenges on the manufacturing side. And like in the beginning, we were using wood fiber based insulation in combination with our hemp composite to try and reduce the overall thickness of the wall. Natural materials perform very well in lots of ways, but generally you end up with very chunky walls because the thermal conductivity isn't that low. And so we're trying to find something that's lightweight and kind of comparable in terms of thickness with conventional construction. So that was how we started out. And then a couple of years into nature, the hemp fiber product kind of got off the ground manufacturing in the UK, and it was like, fantastic, we can switch to something that's a bit more aligned with what got me into it in the first place. And so now we use two different hemp based insulation materials inside the panels, and it's roughly in proportion to how it grows. And that's, for me, part of the kind of long-term vision is actually we could just take the biomass from the industrial hemp crop and, plants in one end, panels out the other, as a way to generate new revenue for farmers and kind of, revitalize the rural economies that have struggled for a while and deliver housing. Seems like a no-brainer. Don't know. Maybe I'm biased.
And what have been some of the pivotal moments? I mean, I'd like to almost take you back to like, what was your first demonstrator and sort of, where are you at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in the evolution of it. So I guess our very first pilot project, we built a lab for Mike, who's our director of research. And we were experimenting with the idea of larger format panels. Right. So we basically pre-assembled the Adept panels are 600 wide. And part of the reason we did it like that is because we wanted them to be suitable for awkward access sites, so constrained access. And when we were doing our first pilot, we thought, well, actually, maybe it would be more efficient to use bigger panels. So we started pre-joining our smaller panels into 2.4 meter wide ones, and we got telehandlers and we craned them in. But that was really interesting because we basically realized that by the time you add all of the additional logistical challenges of lifting and maneuvering and, all of that stuff, actually, we probably could have delivered it in the same time, just taking the individual panels. And I guess even before that, we originally conceptualized like full volumetric modular. We were thinking we'll pre-make, a cabin in a factory. And then I went to visit some of the other modular factories and kind of saw how they worked and thought, I'm not sure this is the right approach, which is why we've gone down the route of standardizing the panels rather than making the whole building. It's trying to find the sweet spot, basically.
I think if anyone's ever visited Futurebuild, especially for the last sort of 2 or 3 years, you would have seen our central bar made out of your panels. And actually, this year at another show, you finally brought a full house as well.
So we did actually finally do the volumetric thing. Yeah. So even though we we started out conceptualizing it like that, and then we very much moved down the route of doing these smaller panels. It's been nice to go almost full circle and do a full a kind of volumetric install with modular pods and things, so showing really the versatility of the panels. You can do it as a flat pack kit, you can install it in prefabricated modules, but obviously there's all kinds of challenges, benefits that come with all of those different levels of modularization, basically.
I'd love to touch on some of the challenges you've had along the way, because I see it time and time again, especially in the sort of startup community and a demonstrator, where you get pigeonholed into sort of the garden office or the sort of the small extension and never quite get into the large scale build.
Yeah.
Sort of what's been some of the barriers to that? Maybe, and maybe sort of like, if you could start all over again, what would it you'd say, oh, I should have done that?
Do you know, I think we've certainly not trodden an easy path. And actually, it's interesting that you use that context, because when we started out, like, the conventional wisdom in founding and starting a business is that you pick one niche and you do that really, really well, and you prove your business case, hit your MVP, and then you scale out. And so if I'd have had it my way, we actually would have set up a natural building cabins brand pretty early on, and kind of focused in with the idea that that's it's a small repeatable niche market where we could have made a name for ourselves. And obviously we'll never know what would have happened if we'd done that, but actually it was my business partner with his background in development who basically said exactly this. It's like, we don't want to be pigeonholed as a cabin company, because the panels can be used in so many more different types of construction projects. And actually in that early days, staying flexible in terms of being responsive to the opportunities that were coming to us, and also experimenting with different types of buildings. We did we still do a lot of small garden studios, kind of, little things, but increasingly now we've done a number of classrooms, we've done some residential projects, extensions. In each of those markets or contexts, there's benefits and challenges to natural materials and to modern methods of construction. But actually, I think if we had gone in and just said, right, we're going to do garden studios or we're going to do cabins, we potentially could have got caught in that same trap. So it was his wisdom and experience that actually helped us to steer into a slightly broader world, which keeps it really interesting, but also presents a lot of challenges if you're spreading yourself thin and looking at lots of different types of projects. Obviously, it's partly our technical team love the kind of constant supply of new challenges and questions, but also ultimately, scaling up needs some focus. So
I think a common theme with yourself has always been system change as well, and trying to change the system. And that's really hard. And I think you mentioned it yourself. The sort of the MMC and the modular world is a probably an industry that needs disruption in a positive sense. Love you to touch on sort of maybe where you're going with the Adept Modular system, and maybe how that can. I don't think it's right to say fix the sort of the MMC world, but maybe disrupt it in a positive way and get that moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I guess coming into the industry from the outside, you kind of have an ability to see it from a slightly broader perspective, and obviously there are a fantastic range of different professionals and people involved, but everyone is inherently very focused on their little bit of it because it's such a complex big picture. But I think we've been quite lucky to, I guess, have almost the cautionary tales of the modular industry. And I think it's an example of where it's like, you think if you just throw technology at a problem, you're going to solve it. And the reality is that, in and of itself, the idea of manufacturing buildings doesn't necessarily lead to improved quality, lower cost, or, all of the things that people, initially you might think, oh yeah, that makes sense. But actually when you unpick it, and especially going to visit some of those factories before they mostly went bust, for me was really interesting to see and reassuring that the approach we were taking was trying to be slightly more adaptable, I guess. And partly it was necessity, because setting up a 100,000 square foot factory that's going to churn out giant modules requires a lot of capital investment and a lot of upfront investment. But that also obviously raises the stakes in terms of the risks, etc. And we didn't have that luxury in the beginning. So we were very much thinking about what can we do with, taking, I guess, the most innovative aspect of, for us, it's the kind of CNC machine, which is a kind of precision engineered aspect that I think it's this thing of like, it's incremental versus disruptive innovation. And I think what MMC was trying to do is say, let's take conventional buildings and let's use technology to deliver them and hope that that has these benefits around, quality, affordability, speed of delivery. And then obviously there's inherent challenges that hasn't really worked, certainly not in low-rise residential, it particularly is not really been tapped into by the MMC space. But there's lessons in that. And so what we did was almost come at it from a much more fundamental perspective and think about how can we take a different approach? How can we use precision engineering and natural materials? And, it's hard because what we're doing isn't completely radical. Like, it's natural materials, it's timber, it's joined together using timber pegs. Really it's the oldest way that we used to build things, but it's doing it in a way that is not trying to completely displace conventional construction, but it's also not trying to just replicate it. It's trying to show that there is a middle ground where we can do it differently, but build on all of the lessons that have been learned over the last couple of centuries.
But you're right. I think one of the big challenges of the MMC was when you build a large factory, you've got a lot of overhead costs in terms of skill and labour, not just materials, but also you need the constant sort of churn out the home and the place to pull it. And unfortunately, the construction industry at the moment doesn't work with that planning and lots of other issues. And that's why I find it quite fascinating. I think the approach that you're taking, which is almost going to be, a network of micro factories in essence.
That's the goal.
And creating panels rather that can then, or components in essence, isn't it, that can be brought together.
Yeah. This is it. It's a kind of platform approach. So the idea is you standardize the panels, not the building. Yeah. So our kind of the way we work is with external architects. And I think this is the thing. It's like the way the current construction industry is set up, conventional modular and certainly the category 1 volumetric modular industry basically tells all of the people in the existing construction industry, no, we don't need you. We don't need architects because here's our library of buildings. We don't need on-site trades because we've already done it all in a factory. But actually you kind of need to be able to work with what's already there. And that's what we're trying to do, is provide a bit of a stepping stone. So the goal is to standardize the panels, not the design, but also to be able to pre-manufacture the panels. So the dream would be that we have a stock of the standard panels so that you can actually even out those peaks and troughs, because construction is inherently stop-starty and lumpy, and things can, timelines can stretch or get delayed quite often. And if you've got this continuous manufacturing linear approach, it's kind of no wonder that there's not this compatibility. So we're trying to find that sweet spot, and also having a product that can be taken apart and reused and repurposed kind of fits into that circular ethos.
What does a microfactory look like? What's the, you mentioned it's a CNC machine.
Yeah.
But it's quite a basic build process, actually, isn't it?
Well, this is it. So we're using a lot of, I guess, technology and innovation, but actually it's like front loading the complexity of a building into the pre-designed and engineered kit so that the actual on-site bit is super straightforward. It's reductive slightly, but it's a giant Lego kit. But actually also the manufacturing, once the parts have been machined, the manufacturing process is glue, screw, attach, fill with insulation. Like, it's not, you don't need lots and lots of really capital intensive giant bits of kit to do this. And so bringing it back to the kind of the motivation for me in terms of the link to agriculture, hemp is a fantastic crop, a fantastic construction material, but it's quite a bulky material. So it doesn't, and especially when you're trying to do something that is actually a net kind of positive in terms of sustainability, taking a bulky, relatively lightweight material and shipping it a very long distance, or, you know, road travel, kind of undermines the potential for the carbon benefits of it. And obviously the rural economic side requires it to be plugging into the rural economy. So for us, our manufacturing model is basically quite capital light, but that means that we can hopefully align the manufacturing with the raw material production. You know, it's trying to focus on doing our bit of it really well to stimulate the other parts of the supply chain on the agricultural side. You know, that was the main interest. The learning point for me was like, no one's growing hemp because no one's processing hemp. No one's processing hemp because no one's buying hemp. No one's buying hemp because there's no supply. Like so many things, that's how I started out thinking, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if we could grow some hemp? And then ended up thinking, actually, we need a supply chain to create the demand to get other people to do that bit of it, because that's a massive challenge in and of itself. So we're trying to work with and align with the agricultural partners and side of it, but we're not trying to do this vertically integrated. We're going to do our own developments, you know, grow our own raw material and process all of it. Buildings are a massive, complex entity thing, as well as, you know, you scale that up to community scale and economic scale. And, you know, there's all these layers. So what we're really trying to do is focus on the manufacture and delivery of this bit of it, but also enabling and supporting all the other stakeholders and partners to ultimately deliver lower carbon buildings at a scale that can actually get adopted into the construction industry. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and so what's the sort of, you know, and I suppose that shows the importance of the network as well, and having a network of these smaller factories, you know, within the rural communities. Yeah. What's the utopian view? What's the sort of, you know, what's the next stage? What does that look like in practical terms? That's a farm and a barn and a factory there that's, you know, supplying a local demand for the panels.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you look at the scale of the house building challenges and targets that we have, you know, what we're looking at is factories that can produce 100 homes a year. So in the grand scheme of it, that's a drop in the ocean. But when you think about the value of a house, 100 houses where, you know, the bulk of that cost is staying within the local economy, it's supporting jobs, it's, you know, linking back to sustainable farming incentives and carbon, that kind of whole picture, you know, 100 homes is a drop in the ocean. And so what we don't want is to end up falling into the same traps where you get these kind of behemoth factories that are, you know, gobbling up all of the resources and ultimately increasing the risk to everyone. So yeah, the dream is like a distributed network of these regional manufacturers. And there's been a couple of things recently that have been really reassuring. So in particular, there's a report called, I think it's called Industrializing Construction, supported by I think it's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And what they've laid out is a blueprint for an industrialized model for construction that talks about platform-based kit of parts. It talks about distributed manufacturing. It talks about, they use the word polycentric partners, but the idea is that, you know, every entity in this network is autonomous, but we're all aligned with the same framework, and the kit of parts provides that kind of continuity. And so that's really, I guess, the dream, but it's been nice to see other people kind of coming to the same conclusions, but coming at it from different angles.
You must read that and go, this is what I've been banging my head against the wall trying to say.
Oh, yeah, great. That is what we're doing. I think that was actually is industrialized circular construction. So I think that's trying to bring in that aspect to it. But it's a bit like, you know, we were talking before about the EU bioeconomy strategy that came out recently. Like, it was so reassuring because it's specifically calling for regional bio-based construction hub manufacturing and talking about how they are going to be, you know, directly pumping funding into these types of industries and spaces. And yeah, it's just really reassuring that the policy agenda and some of these other industry initiatives are kind of all reassuring or reaffirming the conclusions we've come to from just actually dealing with the nuts and bolts on the ground.
And you're right. I read your article on the EU bio economy strategy. And one of the points you make around that is you see it as very much as a turning point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Europe is significantly further ahead in this space when you compare, the UK's industrial strategy uses the kind of same, talks about advanced manufacturing, talks about innovation, talks about kind of broad themes. But in terms of this new bioeconomy strategy from the EU, it's more than that, because it's specifically saying like, and this is what we're going to do about it. And they're calling for £10 billion of investment, kind of public-private framework into bioeconomy over, a relatively short time frame. And they have the new carbon removal certification framework that unlocks the potential for carbon credits for bio-based building materials, right, which, sends a really clear signal that there is value in these materials, but also in the supply chains that feed them. And that's something that we're really keen to, from my perspective, the food and farming side of what we're trying to build, it's a key part of it. So yeah, it does feel like a turning point, I hope. It's just whether the UK can follow suit.
Yeah. I do really feel that there's a lot of leadership coming out of Europe at the moment, and I feel, do you feel that sort of with the EU treating almost sustainability as an industrial strategy rather than an environmental one, that's a big signal?
This is exactly it. Like putting sustainability at the heart, it's not like you've got the industrial, 4.0 technology driven stuff over here, and then you've got sustainability over there. It's actually recognizing, and that's, I think, definitely where we've tried to agriculture and construction are two inherently linked industries that are not currently treated in that way, and showing that you can bring them together and use technology to do that. Having that at the core of the strategy, I think sends a signal that it's time to not treat sustainability as an afterthought or an add-on or something that has to be done reluctantly. It's like, actually, it's a massive opportunity for us. So yeah.
Your article also gave some reflections of a recent Irish Embassy event that you went to. Love to get some of your reflections or what stood out from you from that event as well.
Yeah, I think that event is another example in a kind of long line of experiences that I've had, which is engaging with research projects, partners, people operating in Europe, where, they are being very proactive and very intentional about saying, this is the future we want to see, this is the vision we have for regional development, for, prioritization of sustainability. And these are all the pilots that we've supported and done. And I think for me, the UK is just lagging behind in terms of, there's a lot of support, particularly for like early stage innovation, but really, especially the thing in the bioeconomy strategy that was really reassuring for me was this recognition that there is this double adoption curve challenge, where in other industries, you make a product, you prove that it works, you do some pilots, you do technical validation, and then you sell it, and that's scaled. But in construction, you have this other massive valley, which is the adoption curve, where you've got all of these other non-technical challenges, certification, risk aversion, general kind of awareness that you have to overcome. And it's like in the bioeconomy strategy, like there's a graph, and it's like, we recognize that this industry needs particular support because of these unique challenges. And so, it's just really validating to be like, finally, someone gets it.
So can we see, potentially more collaboration for you in Ireland than the UK?
Yeah, I think obviously I've had an opportunity to do some work in Ireland with potential partners and collaborators. And I think obviously with the UK diverging from Europe post-Brexit and things, it's just, the regulatory landscape is very much signalling. And that's the nice thing about construction, as much as it has all of these challenges. It's quite an anticipatory industry, even just talk of coming regulation, people will start, because buildings that are being designed today might not actually be built for 10 years. So you've got to be thinking about what regulations might be in place in 10 years. So I think that's something we're very keen, I'd say that's a real milestone for us, will be our first European pilot. So getting a manufacturing partner going in Europe, that's something that I'm really looking forward to and hopeful that we'll be able to deliver in the near future.
You mentioned their policy and regulation. What do you think the UK needs to be introducing? Or what would...
I think the clearest thing would be, copying. And this is the thing, we wouldn't have to do anything completely unique. We just have to copy what's working from Europe. France mandating the use of bio-based materials sends a massive signal, stimulates market demand. But the simplest thing would just be reporting on embodied carbon.
Yeah.
Operational energy efficiency measures are massively important, but we have made good progress in that part of the industry. But embodied carbon footprints are just not something that people are currently particularly bothered about. And the government just, introduced a policy that requires reporting on that, it would hugely boost people's appetite for using more low carbon materials and solutions. So that would be a very simple thing they could do.
It just seems to sort of, time and time again, it seems that mass adoption is the biggest hurdle that we have, because everything you spoke about and on paper just makes absolute sense, and I just wonder why it doesn't get adopted.
Yeah, I think it's because it's like the way the whole industry is set up is about passing risk, and it's also about people having to in some ways justify their own existence. What we want to do is to provide a technical, certified or validated solution to deliver sustainable buildings, so that architects, for example, aren't having to spend time on every single project re-detailing build-ups and junctions and details that, when really what they want to be focused on is delivering buildings that satisfy their clients, look, fantastic, and are incorporating all of these interesting things. I think it's also just this conventional wisdom in startups where, and we heard it from business advisors and things in the beginning, where it's like, just do a block, just make a bat, just find that tiny little thing and do that really well. And like, obviously, if your primary goal is to deliver commercial returns, then that makes sense. But actually what that doesn't do is address the bigger challenge, which is that every single project, you've got all of these different products, all of these different materials, and then you're relying on the technical expertise of the individual architects or engineers or people to have to know how all of these products work together. And it's how you end up with things like Grenfell happening. It's that layering of complexity. So that's what we're trying to address by saying, well, let's give you some tested guarantee. We'll give you all the standard details, we'll give you the kit of parts, you do the bit that you want to do, and hopefully that will lead to the adoption. Then that will follow. But yeah, it is frustrating, I guess, to see how many good products have not managed to get over that threshold. And cost, obviously it comes down to cost. I
was going to ask you, actually, you mentioned that sort of that double valley of death, which is quite unique to construction, startups. But I'd love to get your reflections on like the funding landscape, because you're right, there has been so many good innovations over the years that have just never quite got there. And I think it's probably the funding issues.
It is. And I think construction is inherently a challenging industry, just because of all the, even if you have a fantastic product, even if you do everything right, it only takes one large commercial, like one big project where some external factor means that the project falls down and it was nothing to do with you, but you still get the consequences. For investors who are looking for an easy life, there's a reason why they all invest in software and low overheads, high return, all of that stuff. As where construction is individual, potentially massive projects, but there's, you only build, especially in the residential world, if you're going to build your own house, usually you're only going to do it once. It's trying to crack into like mass adoption means you have to line up so many different variables, and the appetite for investors, when the risks are so high, you are dealing with buildings, structures, fire, weather, durability, all of that just adds layers. And they could just go and invest in an AI business or whatever, the appetite for that, I think, is challenging. And that's really why public intervention and investment and kind of policy needs to back it up, because you can't rely on commercial traction alone.
What I'm seeing in the market is quite a lot of the larger material groups forming VCs. Saint-Gobain have Nova. Actually, most of the concrete brands, believe it or not, have the VC ventures.
Yeah.
Have you come across that?
Yeah, and I think the thing is, you've got, there's a lot of fantastic innovation out there, but if you have an industry that obviously has established players in the market, the drive is for them to tinker around the edges. It's to find the little gadgets and widgets and little things that they can drop into the way that they currently work that causes the least disruption but delivers improvements. And that kind of incremental innovation landscape is very well suited to venture capital models and those. But if you're trying to do something that is disruptive and actually different, then obviously it's harder to get people to buy into that as a concept.
I couldn't have you on the podcast without asking you the question around hemp insulation. And I think I've asked it so many times, but what's blocking it from becoming mainstream? Because there's huge amounts of money in insulation. We have to look at the PR insulation companies, the mineral rock wool style insulations. These are billion-dollar companies. Why is no one doing it with hemp?
I think so. Indonesia are the kind of pioneers in this space in the UK in terms of being the first manufacturers. Well, I think there have been people that have dabbled over the years, but in terms of getting BBA certification, getting to a scale where they are delivering significant, I think cost again is a factor when you have incumbent materials that are effectively subsidized by the petrochemical industry. Plastic is cheap for a reason, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And then you take something where the existing supply chain for industrial hemp, we have a very small handful of processes for the raw materials. It's a crop, so it is subject to the vagrancies of the British weather. You can have patchy, lumpy supply, and the types of operations that are operating at the scale of, the mineral fiber and the plastic foam industry, they need certainty of supply. And so you've got that issue on the kind of down supply chain side. And then what that leads to is an increased cost at the other end of the supply chain. And ultimately, that's one of the biggest drivers in construction. Understandably, building things is not cheap at the best of times. So anything that adds to that cost, and then you have, I guess, the more perception-based constraints and challenges around natural materials where, especially people, my business partner says that, we have a lot to blame the three little pigs for in terms of a slight obsession with concrete buildings. But I think a lot of that can be addressed through, reasoned technical justifications. But does the average person have the time or the appetite to get into,
long-standing perceptions are the hardest to change.
Yeah. And especially, an Englishman's house is his castle or whatever, especially when it comes to housing, it's the biggest single investment people are ever going to make. They just want to know that that's not going to, have problems down the line. So I absolutely get it. But again, that comes back to why public investment and policy and things should be helping to bridge the gap.
But, we talked right at the start actually about UK farming, and you grew up on a farm, and we know the challenges that we're seeing. That we watch Clarkson's Farm, love that series. He's done so much good to highlight the actual challenges around farming. Could a simple policy shift maybe in UK farming accelerate the hemp industry? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think it's probably the single biggest thing that the UK government could do to, in my opinion, support farmers. What farming needs is certainty, and it needs new revenue streams, because the global food system has driven down prices to the point where farming is verging on uneconomical. And that, one of my other hats is a trustee for a charity called the Food Ethics Council, which is partly because I got really interested in this bigger picture stuff. But actually, biomass and high carbon absorbing crops is not something that currently farmers are incentivized to grow in any particular way. There are some incentives around bioenergy crops, but actually buildings, to me, is just an absolute no-brainer that if you grow a biomass-based crop and you then take that biomass, aka carbon, and you put it in buildings for a long time, that is something that's storing carbon, which is addressing the climate crisis. It's delivering housing, potentially making it cheaper, is putting money back into rural economies. And ultimately, it's giving farmers a reason to grow crops that are proven to have biodiversity and other, environmental benefits, instead of forcing them all to, turn their fields into solar panels or, even bioenergy crops like maize. That's what my grandparents used to grow, was maize. And it's just not a great crop when it comes to sustainability, and the environment, it requires a lot of inputs and fertilizers, and then you're using that to go to make biogas or whatever. It's just, what farmers need is the support and the funding frameworks to allow them to diversify into alternative crop-based revenue streams. And the bioeconomy industry is an obvious bedfellow, and
and they're dealing with climate change firsthand as well. They're seeing the effect now on their crop cycles.
This is it. And in East Anglia, where we're based, oilseed rape has been grown massively historically, but because of the ban of neonicotinoid pesticides, basically oilseed rape crops is at least a 50% failure rate. So when you grow that as a crop, you're just rolling the dice. There's a 50-50 chance you're going to get absolutely nothing. And so hemp is an oilseed crop, so it could be a really good substitute for that. And it has all of these other potential applications and uses, but that's both its blessing and its curse. This is one of the, I think, barriers for industrial hemp. It used to be used for textile and fiber, but actually that's the majority of the biomass is the shiv, which is the wood chippy bit. That has fantastic properties in construction, but it also can be sold as horse bedding or as horticulture, for growing stuff. Or in some ways that proves a challenge for the people who want to get into growing and processing it, is you've got all these different industries and supply chains who all have slightly different demands on your material. And that's kind of why the idea that you could just take the whole thing, turn it into, plant in one end, panel out the other, just simplifies the value proposition for the agricultural partners and that side of it.
Brilliant. Well, let's turn our attention back to you. What does the future look like? For me, it feels like you're on a real tipping point at the moment, and hopefully not in the double valley of death and falling back. But what's next for natural building systems?
I think part of the benefit of this model is that we get to, right now, like the focus obviously is on commercializing the product we've developed, proving it can work at scale, building those partnerships, delivering bigger projects, commercializing, showing that there is the potential for this more mass adoption. But we still have the ability to tweak and to, the research focus of what we do, maintain something that's really critical, that, those two things work together. And what's really fantastic is seeing other products and materials and people who are doing their own thing, whether that's wheat straw based insulation alternatives, or whether that's recycled timber products, or all of these other grown organic based substitute materials. Like the nice thing about the system approach that we take is, within our panels you've probably got upwards of 10 to 15 different materials that come together to make the panels. And so there's endless opportunities to improve and tweak the performance, the sustainability, the supply chain kind of benefits. Obviously you have to balance that with, you can't keep changing things endlessly, especially not in a world where testing is very, very expensive. But actually the nice thing about what we're doing is that we're not trying to develop, we've got the kit. It can make a whole building envelope, so we can do floors, roofs, intermediate elements, but we also can integrate with other systems and other foundation solutions or roofing solutions or whatever. So we kind of got continual ability to technically improve what we're doing whilst not losing the focus on the fact that we need to scale up and commercialize kind of it as it stands. So what's coming for us really is that next step in scale in terms of manufacturing partnerships and pilots. But also I'm really excited about some of the more research work that we're doing. And because we have a lab that we did a lot of our early material testing and development in, we now offer that to other startups that just want some iterative, low cost thermal conductivity. We're not a UCAS lab. We're not doing any declared performances, but like if you're trying to experiment, it's really reassuring and exciting to see some of the new stuff that's coming down the line.
And we finally got to saw the first full scale house.
Yeah.
A bit in an exhibition hall.
Yes.
When were we going to see one out in the wild?
Hopefully next year. We agreed to build a full size house in a trade show because it was an opportunity to really prove the model of like we can deliver this efficiently, and also getting an opportunity to prototype and pilot a full-size house where we're not expecting someone's whole life savings to be funding that. The prospect of being able to do that in collaboration with all these other product suppliers and partners, because it's one of the challenges we have. We do the fabric of the building, but we don't do the windows and doors. We don't do the external finishes. We don't do the roofing materials. We don't do the foundations, so we need all of those other people to be able to be like, here's a complete package. And so doing it in a trade show environment was an opportunity to work with those partners to really promote collectively the potential combined benefit of what we're doing. But also, we had, maximum 3 days, but the actual modular bit happened in 8 hours. So that was really exciting. And hopefully this year we'll be doing our first residential projects. We're not doing volumetric. It'll be like panelized delivery. But we've got all sorts of weird and wonderful projects coming. So,
we said before, collaboration is a real key theme, I think, for you. Where's the next support needed to come from? Is it funders? Is it local authorities, developers? Who is it you want to engage with now?
I think people who are able to support pilot projects where there is a route to a kind of increased demand or a scaled demand. So, for example, one of the projects we're working on right now, which we're really excited about, is a pilot that was supported by a Mayor of London funded program. And through that, we're delivering a pilot with Places for London. So they're part of TfL, they're the property arm. And we're doing an arch, and we're retrofitting the inside of an arch using our panels, which is, we never, again, at the beginning, like you never imagine that that's where we'd be 5 years in, but the potential for this to be something that, they could roll out across, and there are a lot, arches everywhere beyond just TfL's stuff. So, but it's not, we wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for the fact that they are willing to fund this as a pilot. They're not making any big commitments, but it sends a signal that this is a niche application where our product is particularly well suited, but it could have the kind of commercial traction that will help to get investors and other people interested in what we're doing. So I think people in the public sector have the benefit of being able to be, I think, more ambitious with supporting innovation. And if it wasn't for the fact that we had that buy-in, if we were just trying to sell our panels knocking on the door of someone like TfL or Places for London, it would be very hard to get in there because we're newer and we haven't done anything like that before. So doing kind of programs where pilots are an objective and there's a commitment from the people involved that like, you're going to work with a startup, and at the end of this, there will be a physical, because that's the bit that's hard when you're starting out, is you need physical demonstrations of what you're trying to do, and getting funding for that is hard. So,
What's on your wish list? What would be your ultimate demonstrator?
right now, the goal for us is to demonstrate this regional manufacturing model. And so 100 homes is the target, but that is 100 homes per year. So finding a pilot or a partnership where we can go. So we've done one house, we've done individual residential projects, but getting a developer partner or pilot on board is kind of the next step for us. But the USP that I think we can offer, that we're really keen to try and build a model for, is kind of custom built housing. So there are a couple of examples of local authorities that have led schemes like this, but where we could plug in to work with local contractors or partners and take people from the self-build registers who have an appetite to build their own homes, because I think that's where all of the long-term health and performance benefits of natural materials, if you're a developer building to sell it as quickly as you can and make as much money as you can, the incentive to build with natural materials is reduced, versus if you're going to actually live in the building and get the benefits of the improved air quality and the health that the building can offer. So that's the next step for us, would be development scale pilots, ideally with local authorities, but potentially small regional house builders, and that would prove the regional manufacturing model that can then be replicated.
And is there any other, you're in a huge amount of sort of innovator groups and support networks. What's some things that's exciting you at the moment? What are you seeing outside of your own, obviously, products?
Yeah, I think seeing new people, seeing other people who are new to the market with innovation in the fabric space, like physical materials. Like I know that hardware in construction is by far the hardest bit, and seeing people come into the space and make a success of it, and people who seem to be building a lot of momentum, it's really heartening to see. And I think that's maybe, something, maybe it's me, but it feels like in the last 18 months that's picked up quite a lot. So that's something that gives me a lot of hope. I don't know. Yeah.
What's your advice to them? I mean, you must see them come in all sort of, this is going to change the world. And you're like,
I know,
it's going to take time.
The thing is, when we started, there were people who were quite, quite not necessarily negative, but who were quite cynical and who were quite jaded perhaps, and kind of say, well, this isn't going to work and that's never going to happen and this is why. And I tried to respect that they have experience and insight, but also to be, optimistic and purpose driven about what we're trying to achieve. And now I find myself, seeing some of these newer people coming into the industry, and it's like fantastic, but I find myself being the slight voice of like, oh, you want to, I don't know about that, and maybe you should, all of that. So trying to balance that, I think, is interesting to have. I hope I'm not as jaded and cynical as some of the people we engaged with earlier in our development, but yeah.
I think you I've sort of watched your journey from afar, but you had so much success all the way through. You won accolades, awards, and I suppose it's just a challenge keeping that momentum, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing I would say, just on your previous question, the thing I would say to some of the other people who are getting into this space is, like, you can never know it all, and just because you have a piece of paper doesn't mean that you necessarily are more well informed or educated on certain topics. And don't wait for permission to be told that you can do something that you're interested in or that you think you can have have an impact in, because I have no technical background. Obviously trade shows and things, everyone's like, oh, so you're an architect, or you're an engineer, like, because most people in this space, that is how they got into it. But that just because you're coming at it from a different angle, there's no reason not to give things a go. And a bit of naivety can sometimes be a real strength. So roll with it, basically.
I know we talked about a lot of the sort of, we can be quite as negative as an industry. We talk about barriers and sort of, the hurdles and, what's stopping things. But I think actually startups are loved. And I think you've got a real unique position, especially around marketing as well, that people really want to find that new thing and support it the way through.
Yeah, I think you get, obviously, in any industry, you get like the kind of early adopters and the people who are really keen to support it. But I would say on the whole, like the construction industry as a space is absolutely ripe for disruption and innovation. Like there is a kind of undertone recognition of like, there is something that needs to change here. We all know it. We can see it. The numbers are telling us that there's something that needs to change here, and we don't know what the answer is. But you're right, like the appetite for that, I think it is there. It's just the problem of like, when you then start getting into proper technical project kind of scoping and feasibility, that's when people's kind of appetite for risk starts to unwind a little bit. But on the whole, I've found the industry to be very supportive, and there is a lot of sharing of knowledge and collaboration, because you have to collaborate if you're going to deliver building projects. You can't do it as a single entity. So
we always finish the podcast, and I'm sorry I didn't put this on the list of questions I submitted you. But I love to sort of people to highlight, this podcast is all about people that are making a positive impact on the built environment, and you tick that box. But this is, I always like to ask sort of, who's had a positive impact on you, throughout your journey?
I mean, that's a really hard question because there's been so many, I think, people who have supported and just been friendly and been willing to share their experiences. I honestly don't know if I could name a single individual.
It's like the awkward Oscar speech that if you left someone out, then you'd be in trouble.
But people who've invited me to visit their factories or to come and learn from their, I guess, experience, especially people who are in a kind of founding managing director position. I'm certainly not an expert in lots of areas and still have a lot to learn. And I think endless people. Do you know what? I, as a group, I would say the Zero Construct group, if I had to name anyone, because when we first started going to trade shows, we were invited to build the stands for this industry collective called Zero Construct. And it's a kind of, there's ACAN, which is the Architect Climate Action Network, and Zero were a kind of wider, or they were kind of, they are trying to be a wider industry group of people who are interested in how do we actually deliver decarbonisation in the built environment and embodied upfront carbon in particular. And actually, they invited us to build the stands for them at some of the UK Construction Week and Digital Construction Week about 5 or 6 years ago, when we really at that time had only delivered like 1 or 2 very small projects. We would never have been able to afford to go to those types of shows at that stage, but the opportunity to be invited in by a group of industry partners and being given a platform to show people, getting to that physical pilot bit is the hardest bit. So having the opportunity to be supported to deliver a pilot that also then is engaging with the whole industry at these types of shows, I think that was a real game changer for us. And they didn't have to do that. They could have just used normal, conventional, exhibition stand providers and things.
I think that's a really good point. And I would say, if this is my bit of advice to any innovator, but especially if you're in the sort of natural building products side of things, definitely engage with those groups.
100%.
Because they've now got hundreds, if not thousands, of members that are really passionate, very climate conscious, and just want to help as well. And I 100% agree with you. I think I do a lot with ACAN and Architects Declare, and I've done with Letty and all those groups, and they're fantastic networks of amazing people.
We've all got so much to learn, and that's an underlying recognition in those groups is like a lot of it is about coming together to just share what's worked and what hasn't worked, and trying to collectively move us towards better outcomes on buildings.
So we'll finish off with saying, if people are listening, they want to get in touch, they can go on your website, link with you direct on LinkedIn.
Absolutely, we're very keen to chat with anyone who's got an interest in natural materials and also in the potential manufacturing scale up model and that side of what we're doing. Find me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put the links in the bio to this. And Chloe, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. It's been really great. Thanks.